following program contains unfiltered political discourse and opinions with which you may disagree. If that's not your thing, turn back now. Still here? Well, strap yourself in, folks, because you're about to get shell-shocked. Greetings, citizens of the internet. It is your favorite host, DJ Trump, living rent-free in your heads. Today, I've got my good friend George, and we are coming to talk about our 2020 vision today, how we see this epic contest being settled. So,
yes, indeed. Thank you for having me, DJ Trump. And first, I think we should go through what our actual bets are. So for the listeners who maybe were not aware, DJ Trump and I are going to be putting money where our mouths are. We are going to be saying, look, I believe that this is going to happen, and I'm actually willing to back that up with some money.
Not only that, but we're making a public record of it so that we are accountable and there is no way out of it.
Yes, accountability is key.
Right. So, without further ado, and this has become a little bit of a tradition, George and I are going to share our predictions for the upcoming 2020 race. So my prediction in summary is that for 1-to-1 odds, I believe President Trump will win re-election. On top of that, I believe that Republicans will hold the Senate with 51 seats. I think we're going to lose 2 seats net. I think we're going to pick up a seat in Alabama. Doug Jones is on his way out. I think the Republicans are going to lose Gardner in Colorado, McSally in Arizona, and Collins in Maine. And also, for a bit more extreme bets, the things that I don't necessarily believe but would love to be true, and I'm willing to, make a bet on a limb. 4-to-1. So I get $8 if I'm correct, and George gets $2 if he is correct. I believe that I'm betting that we are going to retake the House. It would be nice. I don't know if it will happen, but I'm willing to, have an aspirational bet every once in a while. And I'm also betting at 3-to-1 odds, actually more likely than the Republicans taking the House, that RBG no longer is on the Supreme Court before November 3rd. I mean, actually, let's make that a little bit more elastic. If something happens on the date of the election itself, also counts. But
Yes.
$5, I lose $5 if she. No, I lose $5 if she stays without problems. I gain 15 if she goes. This is not me wishing ill on RBG, although it is in my financial interest to now do so. It is just my prediction that she is in incredibly poor health, and that as much as the Democrats want her to hold on, it seems like there's a non-trivial chance that she will no longer hold the seat, either because of extreme health complications, taking her out against her will, or forcing her to recognize that she just can't hold it together any longer. So those are my bets. And George, if you'd like to elaborate on your bets, and then maybe we can talk about why we disagree and where we agree.
Absolutely. So, like DJ Trump, I am betting that the Republicans lose Senator McSally of Arizona, Senator Gardner of Colorado, and Senator Susan Collins of Maine. I also believe that candidate and now Republican nominee Tommy Tuberville of Alabama is going to unseat Senator Doug Jones, who is the unlikely but quixotic Democratic incumbent in Alabama right now. But the difference here is that I believe that also Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina is going to lose his senatorial seat. And I believe that Republicans will lose control of the Senate because I believe that it will be 50-50. So I believe there will be 50 Republican seats, 50 Democrat seats. And I believe that tie-breaking vote will be cast by, unfortunately, Vice President Kamala Harris. So I believe that Republicans will not control the chamber any longer. And we put do you remember the pricing scheme for that bet, DJ Trump?
Yeah, so if each one is sort of in a tier. So for who holds the chamber, that's $5. For the specific number of seats, that is another $5. And for the specific races, that is yet another $5. So in the hypothetical world where we are right about the number of seats and who holds the Senate and the specific races, we get $15 from the other person. However, as is more likely, we'll be right about some of these and not right about others, so they will cancel out. Let's say, for example, that George is correct and the Republicans lose in North Carolina. He gets all the races right. That's $5. He gets the number of seats right. That's another $5, 50 seats. However, President Trump wins re-election, therefore holding the Senate because Mike Pence would be the tie-breaking vote. Therefore, he would lose $5 and have a net pickup of $5. So each one of these is sort of layered. The House, there's no real layering. RBG's health, there's no real layering. Presidential race, there's no real layering. But the Senate is where it gets interesting. So the maximum amount of money DJ Trump can predict to have, if I just get everything right, would be $43, which I'm really looking forward to. It is more money than I've ever made from this podcast. So if we actually get there, it'll be a good time.
Absolutely. And to elaborate on the rest of my bets, on the House, I am so confident, albeit unhappily so, that Republicans will not retake the House, that I am willing to put $8 on the line that would go to DJ Trump if the Republicans do take it back, and I'm willing to accept $2 if they fail to do so. And then we have a 1-to-1 $5 bet on the presidential race. I'm betting that Biden wins. DJ Trump is betting that his namesake wins.
All he does is win, no matter what.
Absolutely. And then I put $15 on the line if Ruth Bader Ginsburg somehow does not make it past November 3rd. So I guess to adjudicate that discrepancy that DJ Trump mentioned, if she makes it to November 4th, 12 a.m. midnight, then I win $5. Otherwise, I lose 15. So yeah, I definitely am taking the higher risk, I suppose, bet in the sense that, or I have more on the line, but I have a higher probability of winning, presumably. So we'll see how all of that works out.
Right. So, to be honest, I don't think we disagree that much on the House. There's a reason I wanted 4-to-1 odds. I'm an optimist, but I'm not a fool. So,
absolutely.
I mean, it would be wonderful if we could hold the House, if we could pick up the House, if we could actually have a really solid 2020 agenda. In 2021, 2022, the Republicans actually make some meaningful strides in legislation, more than just basic tax cuts, which is always nice, but it's certainly not the extent of what we want out of our legislative control. And I guess, honestly, I think that the presidential thing is less me being an optimist. That was a fair 1-to-1 odds. George did think I was being a little bit too optimistic, but I'm going to make my case. So my argument is essentially that Trump was behind in the polls before, and he was behind in many key states by a lesser margin than he was in 2016. So there's already some precedent for this. Furthermore, I think that there is a legitimate phenomenon of the suppressed Trump vote in polls because people are so embarrassed to say that they support him because it's such a highly stigmatized thing that there is an undercount systematically of how many people are going to be voting for Trump. And finally, I think that Biden is already at his high water mark. I think that he just came out of the convention, albeit a very weird, stilted convention. It feels like the high school play equivalent of a convention. No, not even a high school play. It's like an elementary school play propped up against what's normally a Broadway level production. It's very strange. The Republicans did a bit of a better job, although there was some strangeness there as well. That's the reality of living in a COVID world. And since Trump is seeing a slight uptick in economic growth, since he can point to early actions taken during the coronavirus crisis that actually served the country, and directly contrast with Biden, and since he can point around the world to how much worse it is globally to try and argue that it is not, in fact, his fault that people are dying of coronavirus in the United States, but that this is a global phenomenon, then I think he can make a very strong pitch. Furthermore, as long as riots continue in the streets, that's just natural messaging for the Republicans, and they are not wasting that political capital. So I think that President Trump in particular is very well favored to do well in this race. I mean, the Republicans are more exposed than the Democrats in the Senate by a substantial margin, and that's worrisome. And a lot of the suburb districts in the House might not be coming back, but if there's enough burning, if the Democrats decide to burn enough cities, maybe I can get $8 out of this.
That's fair. I think that your analysis, while I don't agree with all of it, I more disagree with it in I think it's a difference in extent, or a difference in level, rather than a difference in kind. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. There's a reason that I was not going to take much more extreme odds. Having even odds was fair to me. The reason that I think Biden is somewhat favored, not even a huge amount favored, but somewhat favored, is that The riots in the streets likely help the president. However, they can also hurt in the sense that people are already saying on the left that, oh, well, they say this is going to be Biden's America, but it already is Trump's America. Now, any rational observer realizes that Trump did not create these riots and that if Biden were in charge, they would probably be worse. But keep in mind, not all voters are rational observers. And in fact, some of the swing voters are suburban college-educated women or whatever. And as DJ Trump knows, and as any of our long-term listeners might know, I'm not a fan of those. And I don't really think that those women on average are the most rational voters. So I think they could very easily ignore, even though they don't really like the rioting and don't like what it does for their communities, they could unfairly and quite frankly illogically blame Trump for it and assume that somehow Biden's going to make it better. Also, I would say that Biden is right now and has been for a while more ahead of Trump in the national polling than Clinton ever was in national polling averages. He's already slightly past her high water mark and always has been, pretty much, at least for the past couple months. So I think that matters. Now, I think a counterpoint that I would maybe make and concede is that battleground state polls are actually more favorable to Trump on average than they were in 2016, or at least on average they are. I would say a lot of individual states are slightly across the line in Biden's favor. However, the overall averages are better, such that the ones that are all Democrat, even though there are a few more states that I believe are polling on average Democrat than average Republican, perhaps, they're not polling by nearly as much. So it's definitely a modest polling error away from being wrong, and a bigger polling error away, which was more accurate for a more accurate description of the statewide polls in 2016. They're definitely a 2016 level statewide polling error away from being like solidly in the Trump column. So I think there's definitely a case for that. It's just that I see overall so many people are voting, or at least saying in polls that they support Biden, and it's affirmative support too. It's not just that Trump's support is lower than it was in 2016. It's only very, very little bit. It's more that Biden's support is percentage-wise higher than Clinton's was. Like, he has a lot of those so-called undecided voters who may have been third-party voters or may have sat out the election last time, at least a certain segment of them appear to be embracing Biden this time. Now, could those polls be wrong? Absolutely. And could they be sampling the wrong set of people? Yes. I fundamentally believe that white non-college educated voters are systemically undersampled. And I think that problem hasn't been solved at all. And in fact, there's reason to believe that turnout may actually increase on 2016 and increase in a way that favors Trump. However, I don't think that it will do so by enough to make me think that Trump is the leader in this race. Also, I would note that certain groups that didn't turn out as much in 2016 or voted third party, I believe, not just because of the polling, but because they saw that Trump actually is capable of winning, they might turn out this time to Trump's detriment in close states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, but also, just as importantly, Arizona, North Carolina, Florida, Sun Belt states as well as Rust Belt states. So that's, I guess, my interpretation of the presidential race. So what do you want to move on to why I guess you've already explained your stances on all of the things except maybe the Senate. So I'll explain my RBG stance. I think that while Justice Ginsburg's health is quite poor and has been for a long time, I think that because she is doing so much in her personal life to improve it, because I know she has access to the best doctors, because she's a Supreme Court justice, they have a lot of money, and they're near a lot of very high-quality medical centers in the D.C. metropolitan area. And because the November 3rd is slightly over 2 months away, I have a hard time believing that she will depart the court before the start of the midnight November 4th. I just have a hard time seeing that happen, especially in the current circumstances when she doesn't know whether she's going to have a Democrat president who might replace her.
But I see your point. That's why you do have more favorable.
Yeah, and odds. I just think that those odds are so strong. I just think that there's such long odds that she's going to leave at this moment that Yeah, that's I guess my personal view on that.
Number one, she's been limping along for so long that she might not have much of a choice. It might not be a voluntary step. I mean, TDS is powerful. She does not want to give up that Senate seat. No, Supreme Court seat, which is, of course, dependent upon Senate seats, but that's a topic for another day. I am sorry for my slip. In any case, we still need to take into account that maybe she gets overconfident if Biden looks really ahead in the polls. I mean, maybe I'm doing her a disservice. Maybe RBG would really want to stick around. But if her health gets bad enough, and like it might get so bad that she does not have a choice, and if it doesn't get quite to that level, she might decide that Biden is the overwhelming favorite. Although in the aftermath of 2016, that seems like an extraordinarily slim possibility. Like, so, yeah, I don't even fully disagree. I mean, some of this, like the House is more of an aspirational bet. The RBG bet isn't aspirational per se. So, I mean, sometimes in my bets I can be a little bit biased. I just think it would be an incredible situation if that were to occur. So, I'm willing to make a bet on it, partially for my own amusement. This is why George has consistently beaten me in bets.
Well, I don't know. I will say that the bets you took this time, I think that you will probably win at least one, just because we bet on a lot of things, a lot of different things that are interdependent but not totally. So I could see you winning at least one. Now, if I may, I'd like to make my quick case for the Senate and for the House.
All right, and we can go through individual races if you would like. So
Absolutely, I probably will, just for the benefit of our listeners, and because it will benefit my argument. It doesn't really make sense to consider things except to include every part of it, in my view. So I believe that Senator Tuberville, as I mentioned earlier, he's gone. He's or not. He will be. Or he's not senator yet. Excuse my total confusion of the entire situation. Senator Doug Jones, Democrat of Alabama, I believe is done, and I believe he knew that going in. He knew that when he won in 2017 against Roy Moore, even though Roy Moore should not have been running in the first place. He was accused of all these different, sexual assaults against minors and all this other stuff. He was already not particularly well liked among the suburbanites, so he lost some of those people. He had all this other baggage, and he wasn't particularly as well funded as he could have been either, partly because of those reasons, partly because he's just not a good fundraiser. So when Doug Jones only beat him by less than 2%, he knew that in a special election with turnout, with everything going right, that's how he won. He knew that wasn't going to happen again. So I think he voted, I would say, more moderately than most Democrats, but that's not saying a whole lot at all. And he didn't really vote anywhere near as much for centrist causes as he could have. And that's partly because I think he knew he was going to lose, so he wanted to vote his conscience. He wanted to vote his heart. And he accepted that that's just what's going to be his fate, is that Trump's going to be on the ballot this time. Tommy Tuberville, though he's annoying and probably really unqualified and kind of an idiot as far as I can tell, and he supported amnesty, he's a Republican without any problems that ever prevented Alabamians from supporting a Republican in the past. So, I mean, he's going to be an establishment Republican, not everybody's favorite, but Trump endorsed him, he's going to win. And polling bears that out. I see even the most favorable polling to Jones shows him 10 to 15 points behind. I expect Jones to lose by 15 to 20 points. Yeah, I mean, that's my view on why Republicans win Alabama. The other states are a little bit more obvious just because they're not such a weird situation in the first place. Cory Gardner, he won in 2014. So keep in mind, he unseated an incumbent Democrat in 2014, which was probably the best year, like electorally, that Republicans have had in a long, long time. Probably the best year they've had since 1994. And he won by only, I think around 2% at that time. And he ran as a moderate. He was a very effective campaigner. I mean, unmercifully effective. He just eviscerated Mark Udall, who was the incumbent Democrat at the time, by basically making him sound like a birth control freak, because Mark Udall's campaign was about, oh, Cory Gardner is going to take away your birth control. I mean, his ads sounded ridiculous. He sounded like maniacal about it, and Cory Gardner took him, definitely kind of pointed out how ridiculous his claims were and such and how false they were. But this year, it's a presidential year. Colorado has moved to the left since 2014, I would argue, and even since 2016. So he probably will run a couple points ahead of Trump. I don't even believe in ticket splitting as a realistic expectation anymore. I will make an exception for Cory Gardner just because he's so likable by the people in his state. They do like him. But I don't think he's likable enough that someone like John Hickenlooper, who is a well-liked two-term former governor, could possibly lose to him in a year, and that's a presidential year that the Democrats almost guaranteed to win. So, yeah, that's my my assessment on that. And then for McSally in Arizona, I believe that she will lose because she's polling so far behind. You don't come back from an 8-point deficit that has never been challenged that you have still when it's almost September. And she's just a terrible candidate. She lost in 2018 when she was the nominee. And then they appointed her to this seat anyway to face another election in another 2 years. What did they think was going to happen? She's a terrible candidate. Then lastly, Susan Collins. She's going to lose because she basically has actually not fully consolidated the Trump base. I mean, because she's just so centrist and so center-left, I would argue. And also, she's not going to get a lot of ticket splitting because a lot of the people who used to like her, once she voted for Kavanaugh, that erased that. They totally think she's, the worst thing ever again. And she now faces a very well-funded opponent. In fact, a lot of that money came from her vote for Kavanaugh. There was a fund that basically said if Susan Collins votes for Kavanaugh, then we're going to donate like $2 million to her Democrat challenger, otherwise not. So, yeah, I think she's gone. And I don't think any of the other seats, even though there are some competitive seats and both seats in Georgia, Iowa, I would say also competitive is Montana, and then the Democrat seat in Michigan's competitive. I don't think any of those is probably going to flip. That's why I picked 50 and why I picked the seats I picked.
All right, so I don't disagree with a lot there, actually. I think that I actually spent some time in Colorado recently. I got a very progressive vibe. That's not the only reason, obviously, but it's just George has already covered so many of the statistical variables that state has gone further and further to the left, although it still remains a battleground state. John Hickenlooper was a previous governor, so it's not the case of running against somebody who isn't well known or well liked. Hickenlooper has already won statewide election. He was well liked enough that he considered running for the presidential nomination. He didn't stick around for very long. He didn't get off the ground, but he wasn't hated either like some of the other candidates. He just sort of fell into obscurity. So in Colorado, he still has a pretty strong following. As for Maine, I agree. Susan Collins doesn't really appeal to the Trump people because she has positioned herself as more of a moderate, and simultaneously she doesn't appeal to the Democrats because there's no moderation, which we can talk about at a later date. If you are not on board with their agenda, they despise you, and Kavanaugh was certainly the last straw for them. So I think that her goose is cooked. I think that the state's not favorable anyway. I do think it's probably going to go for the Democrats, and I don't really think that split ticket voting is going to happen to the same extent it did in the past. So I find myself largely agreeing with George, which is fairly common on this program, but at the same time we have our differences.
One state I forgot to mention, and this is the one difference I have with DJ Trump's assessment here. I thought that Tom Tillis is going to lose in North Carolina, and I don't think I gave an adequate explanation of why. I think that Trump could even win North Carolina, and because I believe ticket splitting is rare, I don't think it would be a huge margin difference. But the difference is I look at his polling. Trump is polling such that he's actually by the narrowest margins ahead in North Carolina, even though he's not always polling as well everywhere else. North Carolina, he seems to be holding the line. But Tom Tillis is polling terribly. I mean, his polling averages are his polls are between 5 and 10 points behind his Democrat challenger. And a lot of that, it's pretty clear, because the Democrat challenger isn't actually getting that many more votes in polls than Biden. It's more that the Tillis is not getting all of Trump's voters. And a lot of that is because he's an establishment Republican. He doesn't stand for much. Like, he wrote an op-ed about how he opposed Trump's border emergency, and then he ended up voting for it. He's not really voted against the establishment on any of their big spending bills, on any of their weak, cultural, social legislation or anything. So, I mean, he hasn't given them a reason to vote for him. And I think that is why there are a lot of Trump voters, a lot of people who are conservatives. I mean, they believe in a lot of the conservative principles and such, and they embrace the ideology as a whole, but they do not support Tillis because they don't see him as one of them. So that's why I'm betting against him.
All right, I see your point. I just think that since split ticket voting is going to be rarer, I think Trump is going to do rather well in North Carolina. I just think of that more as a Republican stronghold. I understand that's become a bit more volatile in recent years, but I'm a bit more optimistic about Tillis's chances just on riding off of Trump's coattails, not because of any particular merits of the candidate, but that's just my take on it. So I see your point. It seems somewhat similar in a situation to Maine. The difference is that I don't think that the underlying situation in Maine is as favorable to a Republican candidate. So I think a more solid Republican candidate would also have a hard time winning, whereas I think in North Carolina it's more favorable territory. So even though Tillis might be in a similarly weak position, he has better fundamentals on the ground than Collins does. So I think he has a better shot of holding it. It would be hilarious. Like both of us could get egg on our faces and Collins could stick around while Tillis bites it. Who knows?
That's a fair. All of what you said is fair, but I actually think I'm definitely willing to say that even though I'm betting against Tillis, if I were to say who's my most marginal senator I'm betting against, it's definitely Tillis. I think he's the least likely to lose of the four I'm betting against, of the four Republicans I'm betting, or of the five really, because I believe Jones is actually more likely to lose than any of the others. Like I could see a scenario in which everybody else hangs on, but Jones still loses. He loses if Biden wins the popular vote by 10 points. He loses if Biden loses the popular vote by 10 points. I mean, there's no way that Jones holds on. Anyway, the other thing I will say is, in all of these candidates' favor, especially because it's clear that for McSally and for Tillis, they're not getting the full Trump base. Sometimes voters will kind of find their way home to their partisan candidate. And even this late in the game, it's possible that some do. The reason I give Tillis a little bit of a better chance than McSally is that McSally already lost a race. Tillis won one. Now, granted, she was running in 2018. Tillis is running in 2014. But I will say that Tillis has polled sometimes well. A couple of his polls are okay. None of McSally's polls. I mean, there was one like in the middle of 2019 or late 2019 that had her doing well. That was it. I mean, she's just an awful candidate. Genuinely awful. I mean, and I don't mean to disparage her as a person or disparage her military service for sure, but she's just very, very bad at running races. Now, the last thing that I'll talk about for my prediction is the House. So, or did we already discuss that? Did I already discuss that? I think
we discussed that briefly, but if you want to go into more statistical justifications, because all we really said was we thought that the Democrats were overwhelmingly likely to take the whole House.
Yeah, I'll go into just a little more detail. So on all the political analyst websites I've read, most of them appear to think there are as many Republican seats in play as Democrat seats in play. So I mean, I think that's a little bit extreme. I think Republicans are likely to pick up probably about 5 seats, roughly, something like that. I think that Republicans are in a slightly better position to gain seats than Democrats, and part of that's just because there are more Democrats than Republicans, so more Democrats will probably lose, in the House right now. And there are certain seats that I think are really, really likely to get just flip. Like I think Minnesota's 7th district is may very well flip. That's Colin Peterson. It's like a 30-point Trump district, but there's been a Democrat there who's been in office since 1991. So he's just kind of a good old boy per se, but I think this may be it for him because he has his first credible opposition like in a very, very long time, if ever. And his districts obviously move very much farther to the Republicans than it ever was before. And the former lieutenant governor, Michelle Fischbach, is running against him. She has a lot of money, and she, is a capable candidate. She very well could knock him off because he was already only winning by about 5 points in 2016 and 2018 when a guy named David Hughes with very little money and very little campaign skill was running. So, I think Colin Peterson may be gone. There are a few others who are just really in deep trouble. I think Oklahoma's 5th district was a surprise flip in 2018. I think that may go back. And maybe there are a few others, and there are a couple of Republican seats that may be lost. But I think Republicans will pick up a few seats. I just don't see the kind of movement toward the GOP that would necessitate taking back all of the seats. I mean, it's pretty rare. I mean, most of the time during a presidential election year, you don't have a flip of more than like 10 or 15 seats, which Republicans, I believe, would need 19 or so, 18, 19, something like that, seats to win. Plus, we're actually guaranteed basically to lose two, because in North Carolina, there was court-mandated redistricting that basically made two formerly almost safe Republican seats basically safe Democrat at this point. So there's, I mean, we're already built in with a disadvantage. So that's basically my argument for why it's very unlikely that we would take back the House, even if we pick seats up.
All right, and that actually segues very nicely into the last topic of the discussion, which is less of a bet and just more of a prediction, because obviously the 2020 census is coming to a close, and that's going to influence how the districts are drawn in the upcoming elections for the next decade. So what do you think the general fortunes are of both parties in the coming census and the following gerrymandering?
So I do think that Trump did some good by scaring a few illegals and other groups into not filling out the census. I think that had some impact. I don't know how much. I think that some states, so Minnesota probably is actually going to, for example, because it's losing a seat most likely, and that will probably be in favor of the Republicans. The Republicans probably won't, they're going to probably pick up a seat, this term, and I imagine they're not going to lose any of them, but they could. In any case, I think they're guaranteed 3 and maybe 4 seats in a 7-seat Minnesota, and right now they only have 3 or so that they have. So, I mean, I think that's good for them. I think a couple other states, Texas is going to expand, which theoretically should help Democrats, but if I don't know how it's going to look. It depends on how many flip this time, because if so many flip this time, it may be that it actually hurts Democrats. California is going to lose a seat probably for the first time ever. They've gained seats, I believe, every single census they've been involved in. So not only are they going to not gain, which would staying the same would be the first time that's ever happened in California, but they may very well lose one. And I think part of that is just a lot of emigration away internally from California because it's so expensive and has so many homeless people, so much feces in the streets. I mean, just a lot of problems. But also because I think some of the illegal immigrant population, which is obviously disproportionately large there compared to the rest of the country, even adjusted for California's huge population, I think a lot of those people may have been afraid to, do the census, and that I believe can be credited to President Trump's rhetoric. But even though the citizenship question didn't make it on there, I think that redistricting as a whole will probably, so it's going to be not as good as 2010 because there are a lot of Democrat governors who are in power now, and some Democrat state legislatures too that weren't the case in 2010 or in the 2011 round of redistricting after 2010. So I think it's going to be less favorable to Republicans than it could be. But I think because a lot of Republican marginal seats actually that were designed for a more favorable environment than 2018 really turned in the Republicans' disfavor in 2018. In some ways, I think it may actually work well because then the next time, if there is a next time that the GOP has a wave, it will be able to sort of sweep through marginal Democrat districts more easily. And other thing I will say is I think a lot of states there may just be deadlocks because I think you have a state like Pennsylvania had this. That's why their court ended up writing a map in 2018. It was a really unfair one too to the Republicans. I mean, it's basically a Democrat gerrymander, but the Democrat governor and Republican state legislature just couldn't come to an agreement. So I think, and there are a lot of states that are like that: Wisconsin, Michigan, like Kansas, even North Carolina. Now, North Carolina, I believe, actually when Pat McCrory lost, but before he left office, during the lame duck period, I believe they passed a law and he signed it that took away the governor's power in redistricting, but which people saw as a cheap move. But I think it's what they did, and I don't know. I don't know how that's going to impact redistricting in there because really, they have maps now, but those are going to change pretty soon. And Florida, I also don't know about, but I mean, that's all Republican. It's just that it's a closely divided state. So I'm thinking states like that could be interesting. And a lot of states now, and this has been accelerating recently, are having citizen redistricting commissions, which I find to be a terrible idea because in California it was actually entirely used to cut the Republicans out of the process entirely, because basically a lot of activist groups got special treatment and such. So I mean, I think this is a time that DJ Trump and I can pitch our slightly different, but I think largely, at least in principle, similar systems that we prefer for redistricting. I prefer a system that privileges shortest cut, but also within shortest cut minimizes county splits. DJ Trump prefers one that's purely shortest cut, regardless of how many counties it splits. In any case, we have slight different. We've discussed why we have those different preferences other times, but I think it's a good reminder of why those systems sometimes are valuable and how they can sometimes circumvent gerrymandering. That said, I think Republicans are in a decent spot because I think they will probably pick up some state legislative seats, and they may pick up one or two gubernatorial seats. One important one I have to mention is that Montana is supposed to pick up another congressional seat and have 2 seats after the 2020 census. So the Republicans already have a legislature, and because I would say the Republicans are at least even money, if not favored, to win the gubernatorial seat. I believe Lieutenant Governor Mike Cooney, a Democrat, is behind current Congressman Greg Gianforte, who ran in 2016 and lost. I think that will probably put them in a position to configure those 2 seats to remain both Republican rather than to let one be super Republican and one be more of a toss-up. So I guess that's one good thing I can say. And one thing that I can feel, because it's such a small state and so hard to redistrict it, and then Minnesota, because of its peculiarities, pretty well I have a pretty confident assessment of how they're going to do their redistricting. But yeah, that's that from me.
All right. I appreciate that analysis, and I think that about wraps up our predictions for 2020 as of right now. And stay tuned, and you'll find out, audience, how these bets are going to resolve themselves. Also, if you want to make your own bets in the comments section. I don't know. Yeah, I guess you don't have to put any stakes on it unless you want to organize something with your friends. George and I have always enjoyed this as a little electoral tradition, and by always, I mean.
And also in the comments, you can put in the comments, say that you want us to announce your bet if you'd like, and we can announce who made bets if you're interested in having some attention drawn to it, or getting your opinions out there. And we can keep it anonymous and all, but just to point out who or what people are thinking, because we love to share the views of our listeners, and we really enjoy that kind of engagement.
Absolutely. Well, this is DJ Trump signing out. Thanks for checking in.
Yeah, bye from George.